Book, The Photographer. Episode 1. The Lens of Lucidor. The rain in the city of Brickton wasn't falling. It was hanging in the air, a permanent, greasy mist that seeped into bones and undeveloped film alike. Leo Mercer's studio, once a vibrant cavern of controlled light and creative chaos, now smelled of mildew, stale coffee, and quiet defeat. The portraits on the walls, a laughing bride, a brooding artist, a grinning child, were no longer trophies. They were tombstones for a talent that had flatlined 18 months ago, the same night a patch of black ice on Route 117 had taken Diane, and the headlights had forever changed their meaning from a beacon to a weapon. His agent, a sharp woman named Cynthia, who treated optimism as a professional liability, had laid it out. You're doing forensic photography for the living, Leo. You're documenting surfaces. The pulse is gone. Find it or we pivot to catalog work. Appliances don't have souls to miss. A corrosive desperation, the kind that makes a man try stupid things, led him to the Saturday flea market in the cavernous, drafty warehouse on the outskirts of town. He moved past tables of warped vinyl records and chipped porcelain, his photographer's eye automatically cataloging the visual noise without interest. Then he stopped. It sat alone on a corner of a stained wool blanket, next to a crate of rusted hand tools.
A camera.
A Lucidor, a boxy, medium-format twin-lens reflex from a forgotten post-war era, all brushed chrome and cracked black leather. It didn't look manufactured. It looked revealed. The taking lens was a dark, perfect pupil. The viewing lens above it was a cloudy, knowing eye. A small tag, written in a spidery, archaic cursive, was tied to the shutter release. $85. For the seeing man. The vendor was ancient, swaddled in a thick peacoat despite the indoor heat. His eyes were the color of weak tea, and they didn't focus on Leo so much as absorb him. A patient instrument, the old man said, his voice a dry rustle. It doesn't snap. It considers. It develops the truth, not the light. Leo, a digital purist who hadn't touched celluloid in a decade, felt a jolt in his hands, a phantom memory of a different kind of craft. He paid in cash, the transaction feeling less like a purchase and more like a clandestine exchange. That night, in his personal darkroom, a sacred space he'd avoided since the funeral, he loaded the Lucidor with a roll of vintage Panatomic film he'd found in the bottom of a drawer. The camera was heavy, a brick of cold intent. He had no model. He pointed it at the only thing in the room that held meaning, Diane's reading chair, empty, the indentation in the cushions still vaguely shaped like her. The click of the shutter was a profound, satisfying clunk that seemed to echo in the silent house. He developed the roll himself, the motions returning like a muscle memory. The fixer bath smelled like childhood, like discovery. Under the dim red glow of the safe light, he watched the first sheet in the developer tray. His heart stuttered. The image that emerged was not of a chair. It was a portrait of presence. The empty space in the cushion wasn't empty at all. It swirled with a texture of loss, so vivid it was almost tactile. The ambient light in the room didn't fall on the fabric. It seemed to weep from it. He hadn't captured an object. He had developed a ghost. A perfect, heartbreaking ghost. It was the most masterful, the most horrifying photograph he had ever taken. A fierce, terrified elation surged through him. The magic was back. But it had come from the box, not from him. Episode 2. The Developing Truth. The Lucidor was not a camera, it was an addiction. Leo's sleek digital rig sat in its case, a dead relic of a simpler time. The old box demanded ritual. It was slow, deliberate, hungry for film and silence. Its truth was a chemical truth, born in darkness. His first live subject was Annie, the checkout girl at the local grocery, a woman with a constellation of freckles and a smile that never reached her eyes. He asked to take her portrait, offering her $20 for her time. She agreed, shyly. Through the Lucidor's viewing lens, she was just a girl in a fluorescent-lit break room. But the print that emerged hours later was a different story. Her freckles looked like distant stars in a galaxy of profound exhaustion. The polite smile was a grimace of endurance. In her eyes, the Lucidor had caught not sadness, but a simmering, quiet rage, a fury at the mundanity of her life, so sharp it could cut glass. When Leo showed her the print, her face drained of color.
She didn't speak.
She just touched the corner of the photograph, her finger trembling, then walked out without her money or a word. Next was Paul, his landlord and occasional drinking buddy, a man built on loud jokes and backslaps. Paul hammed it up during the sitting. The resulting portrait revealed a man being crushed by an invisible weight. His booming smile was a crack in a dam holding back a flood of financial terror. The warmth in his face was a facade, and the Lucidor had developed the blueprint of the crumbling structure beneath. Leo was captivated and deeply afraid. The camera was an X-ray for the soul, a psychiatrist with a film back. It saw the secret self, the one hidden behind the daily performance. His big break, the one Cynthia secured to reignite his career, was a portrait session with Elias Vance, a celebrated federal judge known for his piercing intellect and a demeanor as warm as a marble tomb. Vance wanted a portrait for his chambers, something authoritative, but with gravitas. Not a publicity shot. The judge sat in Leo's studio like a king granting an audience, his posture perfect, his silver hair a helmet. Leo peered through the Lucidor, adjusting the focus. The ground glass showed the distinguished jurist. But as Leo's finger found the shutter release, the image in the lens shimmered. For less than a second, Judge Vance's dignified face seemed to slacken, the intelligent eyes glazing over with a wet, naked hunger. The line of his mouth hinted not at wisdom, but at a deep, secret cruelty. It was a glimpse of a basement self, a thing that lived beneath the robes. Leo jerked his head back, blinking. The judge sat there, impassive. A trick of the light, the strain. He took a breath, held it, and pressed the shutter. The clunk was final, like a cell door closing. He developed the film that night with a sense of dread he couldn't name. The portrait of Judge Elias Vance was a masterpiece of sinister duality. The public man was there, the wise eyes, the firm jaw. But layered into the shadows, in the set of the shoulders and the slight curve of the lips, was the other man. The verdict wasn't written on his face. It was a death sentence implied in the grain of the film itself. Leo felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He had not just taken a portrait. He had taken a secret, and the Lucidor had developed it in perfect, damning detail. Episode 3. The First Proof. Leo spent 3 days staring at the portrait of Judge Vance, propped against the darkroom sink. It was his greatest work. It was also a monstrous invasion. He couldn't give it to the man. The contradiction was paralyzing. On the 4th morning, Cynthia called, her voice uncharacteristically brittle.
Lay.
Turn on the news. Channel 7. He fumbled for the remote. The screen filled with a stern, concerned face of a news anchor. Over her shoulder was a professional photo of Elias Vance. Shocking developments in the case against Judge Vance, the anchor was saying. While the judge has been a figure of immense respect, federal prosecutors today unsealed documents alleging a pattern of coercive and deeply unethical behavior spanning decades, hidden behind a wall of legal intimidation. The allegations describe a predator in robes. Leo's blood turned to ice. The news report cut to footage from outside a grand courthouse. There was Vance, being led through a scrum of reporters, his face a mask of outraged dignity. But for a split second, as a flashbulb went off too close, the mask slipped. The judge flinched, and in that unguarded moment, Leo saw it. The exact same wet, cruel hunger the Lucida had captured. It wasn't an allegation in a document. It was the truth, printed in silver on his darkroom shelf. Coincidence? It had to be. A lucky, horrible guess by the camera. A reflection of some subliminal cue he'd picked up and the camera had somehow exaggerated. He needed to test it, to break the spell. He would use the Lucidor for something pure, something joyful. He called Ben, his most light-hearted friend, a middle school music teacher with a perpetually optimistic disposition. Ben agreed, coming over with his beloved, battered saxophone. "Make me look like a jazz legend, Leo. A tragic, misunderstood genius."
Ben left, striking a playful pose.
Leo smiled, but it felt tight on his face. He raised the Lucidor. Ben's grinning face filled the ground glass. Leo focused. He saw his friend's easy smile, the laugh lines. He pressed the shutter. The clunk sounded heavier this time. He developed the film immediately, his hands trembling slightly. The image swam up in the developer. It was Ben. But it was Ben 30 years from now. The face was gaunt, the eyes hollow and haunted. The saxophone wasn't an instrument of joy. It looked like a rusted pipe he was clinging to for survival. The background of Leo's studio seemed to dissolve into a stark, institutional white wall. The portrait was one of profound loss and quiet despair. It was the portrait of a man who had lost everything, including his music. Leo staggered back, knocking a bottle of fixer to the floor. The acrid smell filled the small room. This wasn't the present. This wasn't even a hidden truth. This was a prediction. A terrible, specific possible future. The Lucidor didn't just see the secret self. It saw the consequence. His doorbell rang, shrill and insistent in the silent house. It was Ben back to see the result. "So, let's see this masterpiece." Leo stood frozen in the darkroom doorway, the wet, damning print of his friend's future hidden behind his back. He felt the weight of the Lucidor on its shelf, a silent, observant God. He had to get rid of it. He had to destroy it. But first, he had to look at Ben's cheerful, expectant face and lie. "Ah, the film, it was a dud, Ben. A blank roll. My mistake." The words tasted like ash. Ben's face fell. Then he shrugged with his typical good nature.
"Ah, well.
"Next time, we'll get that legendary shot." After Ben left, Leo locked the door. He took the Lucidor from the shelf. It felt warm, as if it had a heartbeat. He raised it, intending to smash it against the steel edge of the developing sink. He looked into the dark, knowing eye of the viewing lens. And in its depth, he saw his own reflection. But it wasn't his face. It was a face twisted in a rictus of rage and grief, holding the camera not as a tool, but as a weapon. The reflection slowly, deliberately, winked at him. Leo lowered the camera, his breath coming in short gasps. He couldn't destroy it. He was part of its process now. It had developed him, too. Episode 4, The Autofocus. The portrait of Ben's future. Leo thought of it as the ghost of jazz yet to come. Stayed hidden in a steel flat file, a premonition filed away like a bad dream. But the Lucidor would not be ignored. It sat on its shelf, a silent, gravitational pull in the center of Leo's life. The digital cameras were now just plastic and silicon to him. They saw nothing real. He tried an experiment. He took the Lucidor to the city park on a sunny afternoon, a place teeming with life. He pointed it at a young couple entwined on a blanket, laughing. Through the viewfinder, they were golden and in love. The print he developed showed them turned away from each other, the space between their bodies a cold, dark gulf. He pointed it at a jubilant dog chasing a frisbee. The resulting image was of the same dog, cowering, its tail tucked in what looked like a sterile kennel run. The Lucidor was broken. But it wasn't broken technically. It was broken morally. It was a pessimist, a nihilist in a chrome box. It only developed the worst possible truth, the hidden fracture, the coming ruin. And then came the invitation to the gala. The Vance scandal was the talk of the town, and Leo, as the last person to professionally photograph the judge, found himself a macabre curiosity. He was invited to the Arts for Justice charity auction, a glittering event where the city's elite gathered to assuage their consciences with expensive canapes and tax-deductible bids. Cynthia insisted he go. Network, Leo. Show your face. Be the brilliant, sensitive artist who saw through the monster. It's a narrative. He went, feeling like a fraud. He brought the Lucidor, tucked in its battered leather case. A security blanket or a concealed weapon, he wasn't sure which. The event was a symphony of false notes. He saw politicians with practiced smiles, socialites with eyes calculating the room, philanthropists whose generosity ended at the edge of the spotlight. He felt a reckless, self-destructive urge. In a quiet corner, he loaded a fresh roll into the Lucidor. He wouldn't photograph people. He would photograph the room, the collective performance. He found a high balcony overlook, raised the camera, and took a single, sweeping shot of the glittering crowd below. Back in his darkroom at 3 a.m., he developed the long, panoramic negative. What emerged made his knees buckle. It wasn't a ballroom. It was a feast hall. The crystal chandeliers were jagged, bone-like structures. The elegant gowns were tattered shrouds. The smiling faces were skulls caught mid-grin. The champagne flutes held dark, viscous liquid. At the head of the room, where the mayor had been giving a speech, stood a tall, thin figure with the head of a praying mantis, its claws raised in benediction. The photograph was a Hieronymus Bosch painting rendered in perfect, photographic realism. It was the true face of the evening, the hidden reality of hollow ambition and predatory social mechanics. Leo vomited into the darkroom sink. This was beyond psychology. This was supernatural. The Lucidor didn't just see personal demons, it saw the archetypal ones. It peeled back the skin of the world. Shaking, he did the one thing he had sworn never to do. He set the Lucidor on a tripod, pointed it at the empty stool in the darkroom, and sat behind it. He would take a self-portrait. He had to see what the camera saw when it looked at him. What was his hidden truth? What was his coming ruin? He used a cable release, stretching it out. He looked toward the lens, trying to keep his face neutral. The camera was a cold, cyclopean eye. He clicked the shutter. The clunk echoed like a stone dropped into a deep, dark well. He developed the film with the ritualistic care of a man preparing his own autopsy. The image began to form. It was him, Leo Mercer, but not as he was. He looked older, wearier, his eyes blazing with a frantic, obsessive light. He was not looking at the viewer. He was looking down at something in his hands, the Lucidor itself. And in the self-portrait, he was holding the camera not to take a picture, but aiming it like a gun. His mouth was open in a silent scream that was either a warning or a battle cry. And behind him, in the shadows of his own darkroom, were faint, spectral shapes. Dozens of them. The blurred, anguished faces of Annie the checkout girl, of Paul the landlord, of Judge Vance, of Ben, of the skeletal partygoers. They were all there, trapped in the background. A gallery of the damned, captured by his lens. The final, most terrifying detail was in the corner of the print. His own reflection, tiny, caught in the dark eye of the Lucidor's lens in the photograph. And in that reflection within the photograph, his image was smiling. A small, cold, satisfied smile. The camera hadn't captured his secret self. It had captured his future self. The photographer who had fully embraced the lucidus power. The curator of consequences. He heard a sound then, from the studio beyond the darkroom door. A soft, solid clunk, identical to the sound of the shutter. Episode 5. The Darkroom Door. The sound froze him. It was impossible. The Lucidor was here, on the developing table, still warm from his hands. The tripod stood empty. Clunk. It came again, clearer now. Not from the studio. From within the darkroom itself. But the room was small, barely 8 by 10. He was alone with his chemicals and his horrors. His eyes darted to the new self-portrait, still dripping. The image of his future self, aiming the camera like a weapon. A wave of primal understanding washed over him. The Lucidor didn't just predict futures. In some way he couldn't grasp, it negotiated with them. It was a bridge. And he had just taken a picture of the other side of that bridge. Clunk. This time, it was accompanied by a soft, mechanical whir, the sound of the film advance lever on the Lucidor being cocked. The sound came from the corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest, pooled under the sink. Leo's breath fogged in the chilled air. "Who's there?" Only silence answered. Then a faint rhythmic sound. Scritch, 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 like a nail on photographic paper. He grabbed the heavy metal film reel tank, the only thing resembling a weapon, and edged toward the corner. The safe light cast everything in a bloody, indistinct gloom. He peered under the sink. There was nothing. Just pipes and a dusty bottle of stop bath. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was right beside his ear. He whirled. On the wall, next to the drying line where his self-portrait hung, another photograph was pinned. One he had not developed. One that had not been there a minute ago. It was a black and white shot of this very darkroom, taken from the corner by the sink. It showed Leo's back, hunched over the developing tray. The image was grainy, urgent, taken without a tripod. In the photo, he was looking down at the portrait of the monstrous feast hall. But in the foreground of this new, phantom photograph, lying on the counter where the Lucidor should have been, was a simple, handwritten note. The camera had focused on it with a cruel clarity. The writing was his own. It read, "IT sees the fracture. It focuses on the crack. Then it pushes." He heard the wet, tearing sound of photographic paper being ripped from a roll. He turned slowly. The self-portrait, the one he had just developed, was changing. In the image, the future Leo, the one aiming the camera, was no longer looking down the lens. His head had turned. He was now looking directly out of the photograph, his eyes meeting present Leo's across the darkroom. The frantic obsession in those eyes had crystallized into a cold, knowing certainty. And the spectral faces behind him, Annie, Paul, Ben, all of them, were a fraction sharper, a degree more real. The cable release for the Lucidor, which was coiled on the table, began to unwind of its own accord, slithering like a black snake onto the floor. Leo understood the message, the terrible, elegant logic of the artifact. The Lucidor didn't just show him the bad thoughts, the hidden cracks, the future sorrows. By showing him, by making him complicit in the knowledge, it set those things in motion. His reaction to Ben's portrait, the lie, the new distance in his manner, was that the first push? Was he now, unconsciously, beginning to treat Ben like a future tragedy, and in doing so, starting to build the very walls that would cage his friend? The camera was a self-fulfilling prophecy machine. He was its operator. He had to get out. Now. He wouldn't touch the Lucidor. He would leave it, lock the darkroom, and never return. He would burn the whole studio down. He turned to the darkroom door, the only exit. The heavy, light-proof steel door was always kept closed during development. He reached for the handle. His hand stopped an inch from it. Pinned to the center of the door was a fresh, dripping wet 8 by 10 print. It was a photograph of the door itself. But in the photograph, the door was slightly ajar. And through the crack, in the studio beyond, Leo could see a figure standing in the middle of the room. The figure had its back to the door. It was tall and wore a long, dark coat. It was perfectly still. It was the figure from the judge's portrait. It was the praying mantis from the gala photograph. It was the consequence, the archetype, the hungry thing that lived in the fractures. And in the photograph, as Leo stared, the figure in the studio began, very slowly, to turn its head toward the darkroom door. A soft, wet click came from the Lucidor on the table behind him. The sound of a shutter being triggered. Leo didn't look back. He stared at the photograph on the door. In the image, the figure had now turned fully. Its face was a blur of silver nitrate, a negative space of pure intent. It took a step toward the door. In the real world, in the studio on the other side of the steel, Leo heard a single, heavy footstep. Thud. He was trapped between the camera and what the camera had developed. The darkroom was no longer a sanctuary. It was a developing tank, and he was the image, swimming into a fixer of pure terror. The choice was gone. The Lucidor had taken it. From the table, the camera emitted one final, soft, mechanical sigh. The film advance lever snapped back into its ready position. The session was over. The proof was in the room with him. Episode 6, The Negative Space. The thud from the studio was not repeated. A profound, listening silence took its place, broken only by the faint drip of water from the darkroom sink and the hammering of Leo's own heart. The photograph pinned to the door remained static, a frozen threat. The figure in the image was turned, a blurred sentinel waiting in his studio. The Lucidor on the table behind him felt like a living thing, a predator resting after a strike. The cable release lay coiled on the floor like a discarded nerve. Logic screamed at him. It's just a photograph. A trick of the mind, of stress, of a chemically fogged brain. There is no one in the studio. The door is just a door. But the Lucidor had rewritten his definition of just. It had shown him futures and hidden selves with the brutal clarity of fact. To believe it now only when it suited him was the height of arrogance. The camera had earned its dread. He couldn't stay in the darkroom. The air was thickening, the red safe light pulsing like a dying sun. He had to face whatever was on the other side of the door. Or whatever wasn't. He left the phantom print where it was. He would not touch it. With a trembling hand, he reached past it and grasped the cold steel handle of the darkroom door. He took a breath that smelled of acid and fear and pulled. The door swung open silently. His studio was empty. Moonlight filtered through the high north-facing windows, painting the polished concrete floor in cold, geometric shapes. His digital camera gear sat on a shelf. The posing chair was vacant. Everything was in its place. Relief, watery and weak, flooded him. A hallucination. A stress-induced episode. He stepped out, the solid floor feeling unreal under his feet. He needed air, real air, not the chemical tomb of the darkroom. He turned to head for the front door of the loft.
And stopped.
On the posing chair, the one that had been empty a second ago, lay a single photographic print. It was an 8 by 10, glossy, still smelling faintly of fixer. He hadn't put it there. He hadn't heard a sound. He walked toward it, each step an act of will. It was a portrait, not taken with the Lucidor. It was one of his own old digital shots, printed on modern paper. A corporate headshot from 2 years ago of a smiling, Middle-aged woman named Patricia Velson, a client he barely remembered. But this print was altered. Across her smiling face, someone had taken a sharp blade, or a nail, and scratched deep, deliberate gouges. Not random slashes. Words. 2 words, carved with violent precision into her paper eyes and cheeks. Remember me? Ice filled Leo's veins. Patricia Velson. The memory surfaced, ugly and repressed. A difficult session. She'd been vain, controlling, never satisfied. He'd been going through the motions even then. In a moment of private frustration, after she'd rejected another perfect shot for a nonsensical reason, he'd muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the microphone on his desk to maybe pick up, "I wish your mirror would show you what you really look like."
A sad, pathetic harpy.
He'd forgotten about it instantly. A petty, unprofessional moment. But the Lucidor hadn't forgotten. It didn't just see the present or future. It was auditing his past. It was developing his regrets. He stumbled back, the defaced portrait falling from his fingers. The studio no longer felt like his. It felt like a crime scene where he was both the investigator and the perpetrator. He fled out the front door, into the cold, misty dawn. He drove aimlessly for hours, the city waking up around him in oblivious normality. He ended up at a 24-hour diner, nursing bad coffee, trying to think. The camera was a curse, but it was also the source of the only powerful work he'd done in years. To destroy it was to destroy the only part of him that felt alive. To keep it was to become the man in the self-portrait, the obsessed warden of other people's damnation. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Local music teacher in accident. His thumb fumbled, opening the link.
Ben.
A hit and run. Critical condition.
Coma.
The accident had occurred at 3:18 a.m. The exact time Leo had been developing the portrait of Ben's hollow, hopeless future. The coffee cup shattered on the linoleum floor. It wasn't a prediction. It was a scheduling. Episode 7. The Fixer Bath. The hospital corridor was a tunnel of fluorescent hell. The smell of antiseptic and despair was a different kind of chemical bath. Ben lay in the ICU, a network of tubes and wires holding him to the world, his face pale and still beneath a bandaged head. The vibrant, joking man was gone, replaced by a breathing statue of potential loss. Leo stood outside the glass, unable to enter. Ben's wife, Carol, a woman whose face was a mask of shattered porcelain, saw him. She didn't smile. Her eyes, red raw from crying, held a question that had no answer. "He was coming back from an all-night grading session," she whispered. "He said he needed air. He never just walked like that." "He was coming from your house?" Leo's conscience screamed. "He was thinking about your lie, about the blank roll, about the strange distance in your eyes." He mumbled condolences that felt like lies and fled. The guilt was a physical weight, a lead apron of the soul. The Lucida had shown him a crack in Ben's future, and his own actions, the lie, the fear, had been the push that sent Ben teetering into it. He drove back to his loft, not out of courage, but because there was nowhere else to go. He had to end this. He would take the Lucidor to the old stone bridge over the Caraway River and heave it into the deep, swift current. Let the water silence its mechanical lie. The studio was dark. He didn't turn on the lights. He went straight to the darkroom. The door was still open. The red safe light was still on, casting its infernal glow. The Lucidor was not on the table. Panic, sharp and clean, cut through his fatigue. He scanned the shelves, the counters.
Gone.
On the center of the developing table, where the camera had been, was a new print. This one was not scratched. It was a fresh Lucidor shot, still damp. It was a photograph of his kitchen, taken from the living room doorway. In the photograph, The Lucidor sat on his kitchen table. Next to it was a bottle of his single malt scotch, 2 glasses, and a bowl of melting ice. And sitting at the table, caught in mid-conversation with an unseen person opposite him, was Leo himself. He looked relaxed in the photo, smiling a genuine, unburdened smile he hadn't worn in years. He was gesturing with a glass, his eyes alight.
It was a portrait of peace.
Of normalcy. Of a man who had made peace with the artifact. It was the most seductive image the Lucidor had ever shown him. He walked slowly to the kitchen. The scene was exactly as depicted. The Lucidor sat on the wooden table like a domestic idol. The scotch, the glasses, the ice. The only thing missing was his own smiling self and the unseen guest. He approached the table. The camera seemed to hum with a faint, subaudible frequency. It wasn't threatening. It was inviting. It was offering a deal. The earlier horrors, the phantom footsteps, the scratched portrait, they were the price of admission, the breaking-in process. This image, this possibility of companionship and control, was the reward. He heard a soft sound from the living room, a creak of a floorboard. Not a threatening sound, the sound of someone settling into a chair. "It's easier if you stop fighting it," a voice said. It was a dry, pleasant voice, familiar and alien at the same time. It was the voice of the old man from the flea market. Leo turned, his heart in his throat. The living room was shadowed. In his reading chair, the one he never used, sat a figure. It was indistinct in the gloom, not a solid person but a concentration of darkness. Like a man-shaped void wearing the old man's peacoat. Its face was a smudge of shadows, except for the eyes, which reflected the dim kitchen light with a silvery, mechanical glint. "What are you?" Leo breathed. "A previous guest," the shape said. Its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "A former photographer. The Lucidor requires an operator. It grows lonely. It likes to be used. It's destroying people," Leo said, his voice cracking. "It's developing them," the shape corrected gently. "It shows them their core truth. The fracture line. What they do with that knowledge, that is their development process. You see the crack in the vase. Do you mend it? Or do you give it the slightest tap? The choice, Leo, has always been yours. The camera just provides the focus." "Ben didn't have a choice, didn't he?" the shape whispered. "You saw his despair, his future irrelevance. You chose to lie, to hide it. You treated him as a fragile thing. You pushed him toward the fragility you saw. The camera didn't hit him with a car. Your fear did." The logic was twisted, airtight, and devastating. It absolved the camera and placed the blame squarely on the human heart, his heart. It was the ultimate seduction. It wasn't evil. It was just a mirror, a brutally honest one. "What do you want?"
Leo asked.
"To share the burden," the shape said, leaning forward. The silver glint in its eyes brightened. "To show you its true potential. Not just to see fractures, but to develop them. To create art from the collapse. Think of the power. Not to predict tragedy, but to orchestrate it. The ultimate composition." The figure raised a hand, a blot of deeper shadow. In it, it held a phantom cable release. "Join me. Develop your masterpiece. The one great, terrible, true work you were always meant to create. The Lucidor will help. We will help." It gestured to the empty chair at the kitchen table, opposite the waiting camera. Episode 8, The Exposure. The offer hung in the air, more poisonous than any outright threat. It wasn't just about using the camera, it was about becoming its philosopher, its priest. To see the world's hidden fractures and call it art. To move from observer to conductor. The shape in the chair waited, a patient void. Leo looked at the kitchen table setup. The peaceful self-portrait the Lucidor had shown him was a lie. That man wasn't at peace. He was in thrall. He had simply developed his own guilt and fear into acceptance. He had become the fixer, halting his own moral development in a bath of convenient darkness.
No, Leo said.
The word was quiet, but it echoed in the silent loft. The shape did not move, but the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. A costly development, it whispered. Get out, Leo said, finding a sliver of steel in his voice. Take your camera and go back to whatever flea market hell you came from. A dry, rustling laugh filled the room. It was the sound of old photographs crumbling to dust. It doesn't work that way, Leo. The Lucidor is yours. Bought and paid for. You are its seeing man. If you will not develop with it, it will develop you. On the kitchen table, the Lucidor shutter fired with a deafening clunk. No one had touched it. The flash was not a flash of light, but a pulse of pure, negative darkness. It was a burst of anti-light that sucked the color and warmth from the room for a split second. When Leo's vision cleared, the shape was gone from the chair. But the Lucidor was not alone on the table. Lined up beside it were 3 new, small, square prints, the direct, uncut contact sheets from a roll of 120 film. They were lined up like evidence. The first showed Annie, the checkout girl. She was standing in the break room at work, but the room was now derelict, the fluorescent light shattered. She was holding a knife from the deli counter, her face a masterpiece of unleashed rage. The second showed Paul, his landlord. He was in a bank office, his head in his hands. On the desk before him was a foreclosure notice. The image was so sharp Leo could read the account number. The third showed Carol, Ben's wife, in the hospital chapel. She was not praying. She was staring at a votive candle. Her expression empty, final. In her hand was a nurse's syringe. Potentialities, the dry voice whispered, now emanating from the Lucidor itself. Current developments. All in process. All waiting for their final fix. You can stop them, Leo. You have the negatives. Leo understood. These weren't predictions. They were developing situations. The camera had planted the seeds, the revealed rage, the exposed terror, the despair, and was now developing them in the real world, speeding up the chemical reaction of collapse. He was the only one who could see the process. He could intervene. He could be a hero. But that was the final, most brilliant trap. To engage. To start using the knowledge the Lucidor gave him to manipulate lives. That was the first step toward becoming the conductor. The benevolent warden was just the conductor in a nicer uniform. He made his decision. He would not look at the camera. He would not touch the prints. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the loft, and into the building's stairwell. He would not run. He would go to the police. He would show them the portraits, tell them about Ben, about the judge. He would sound insane. They would commit him. It didn't matter. It was a human solution. A messy, flawed human end. As he descended the concrete stairs, a new sound followed him. Not footsteps. The sound of a mechanical film advance. Whir click. Whir click. He burst out into the alley behind his building. The mist had turned to a cold rain. He pulled out his phone, his fingers numb, to call 911. His phone's screen flickered. The background, a photo of Diane, dissolved into static, then resolved into a black and white image. It was a live image. From a perspective high up, looking down. It showed the alley. It showed him, from behind, a small, desperate figure in the rain. It was the view from his studio window. But he hadn't left a camera up there. Whir click. On the phone screen, the image zoomed in with impossible, silent digital smoothness on the back of his head. The focus was perfect. He looked up toward his studio window, 6 floors up. In the dark window, a faint red light pulsed once. A safe light. The Lucidor was up there,
And it was watching him.
it didn't need him to hold it anymore. Episode 9. The Wide Shot. The rain needled Leo's face, 1,000 cold pins grounding him in a reality that was rapidly unraveling. He stared at his phone, at the impossible live feed from the Lucidor's eye. The image wasn't just observing, it was composing. He could feel it. The frame, the contrast, the tragic figure in the rain. It was building a narrative of isolation and despair. He slammed the phone against the wet brick wall of the alley. The screen cracked, but the image remained, a persistent ghost in the spider-webbed glass. He threw the phone into an overflowing dumpster, a useless gesture. The camera's vision was now internal. He carried its lens inside his own head. He ran, not with direction, but with the pure animal need to escape a field of view. He emerged onto the bustling main street, pushing through the afternoon crowd. Normal people with normal problems. He looked at their faces, and now he couldn't stop seeing them. Not as the Lucidor saw them, but as he feared the Lucidor saw them. The stressed businessman, a future heart attack. The laughing teen, a hidden addiction. The old woman, a crushing loneliness. He was developing their portraits without a camera, his own imagination poisoned by its aesthetics. He found himself outside St. Mary's Hospital again. A magnet for guilt. He had to see Carol. He had to warn her, though he had no idea how. Don't go to the chapel. Don't look at the candles. He took the elevator to the ICU floor. The sterile silence was oppressive. He approached Ben's room. The glass wall revealed Carol, sitting by the bed, holding her husband's limp hand. She wasn't looking at the candles. She was looking at Ben, her face a landscape of pure, unwavering love. For a moment, Leo saw a different portrait. Not one by the Lucidor, but one by his own former self. A portrait of devotion. It was beautiful. It was real. Then Carol's head turned. She looked directly at him through the glass. Her eyes, which had been soft with grief, hardened. They didn't hold a question anymore. They held an accusation. She stood up, let go of Ben's hand, and walked out of the room into the corridor. "Leo," she said, her voice flat. "He's gone for scans. What do you want?" "Carol, I need to tell you something. Something insane." "About a camera?" she interrupted. The world tilted.
What?
A man came by. An older man. In a dark coat. He said he was a friend of yours. A fellow photographer. Her words were ice. He said you were working on a project. A disturbing project. That you believed you could see people's tragedies. He said you'd taken a picture of Ben. A bad picture. And that you believed it made this happen. She gestured toward the hospital room. The shape. It wasn't just haunting him. It was narrativizing him. Framing him as the villain, the unstable artist who willed his friend's misfortune. "He's lying, Carol. The camera, it's real. But it's not me." "He showed me a photograph," she said, cutting him off again. Her composure was terrifying. A print. Of Ben.
He looked empty. Lost.
It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. He said you developed it the night of the accident. A tear finally escaped, tracing a path through her stony expression. "Did you? Did you make some art out of my husband's pain?" The Lucidor's trap was diabolical. It had shown him a possible future to corrupt his present. And now it had shown that possible future to Carol, using it to destroy his past and any chance of redemption. It was developing the story from all angles. "Carol, please. That man, the camera, it's evil. It wants to break things. It's trying to break me, and it's using you to do it." She looked at him with utter contempt. "Get out, Leo. If you come near my family again, I'll call the police. You're sick." He was back in the rain, more alone than ever. The Lucidor had successfully developed his isolation. He was the monster in the story now. The next logical exposure. He had only one place left to go. The source. The flea market warehouse was closed, a roll-down metal door sealed for the night. The rain drummed on the corrugated roof. Leo didn't hesitate. He found a loose panel in the fencing at the back, slipped through, and approached a service door. It was locked. He was about to turn away when he saw it. Nailed to the door, protected by a small sheet of warped plexiglass, was a faded, yellowing photograph. A booth identification shot from years ago. It showed the old vendor's booth. And there, sitting on the same velvet cloth, was the Lucidor. Behind the booth stood the old man, smiling his dry, knowing smile. But standing next to him, a hand resting casually on the camera, was a younger man. A man with a familiar, hungry look in his eyes. A man whose face Leo had seen recently in the news. Elias Vance, the judge, 20 years younger. The caption, handwritten beneath, read, H. Vance and Son. Curios and Antiquities.
Son.
Not a judge. A vendor. A previous owner. The Lucidor hadn't just predicted Vance's cruelty. It had cultivated it. It had been his family business. And the old man that was Elias Vance's father, the previous photographer. He hadn't moved on. He had become the camera's shadow, its salesman, finding it a new, suitable owner. Leo understood the cycle. The camera consumed its user, then used the husk to find the next. He was not the first. He wouldn't be the last. A soft clunk echoed from inside the darkened warehouse. A shutter firing in the empty vastness. Then a new sound. A low, collective hum. The sound of dozens of mechanical film advances, all clicking into place at once. He peered through a grimy window into the market hall. In the deep gloom, on every table, on every shelf, he could see them. Dozens of boxy, chrome and black shapes. Lucidors. An army of them. All pointing toward the door. All pointing at him. Episode 10. The Composite. The warehouse window was a grid of black lenses, all aimed at his face. Leo stumbled back from the glass, the breath ripped from his lungs. It wasn't an army. It was a collection. A museum of the tool's history, a physical record of every time it had been passed from one seeing man to the next. How many tragedies were developed in this hall? How many futures fractured? The logical part of his mind, the part not yet drowned in chemical dread, made a connection. H. Vance and Son. If the old man was the son, Elias, then H. Vance was the father, the original. The shape in his apartment had called itself a previous guest. It wasn't Elias. It was the father. Harold, the first photographer, the one who had maybe even built the damn thing, or found it and had been bound to it so completely that death was just a transition into a permanent state of development. The single, loud clunk from inside the warehouse had been a signal, a starting pistol. From within the vast, dark space, a new light bloomed. Not the white of fluorescence, but the deep, bloody crimson of a safe light. Then another, and another, dozens of them, flickering on above individual booths, painting the cavernous hall in pockets of hellish illumination. In each pool of red light, the Lucidor sat, inert yet profoundly aware. And in the center of the hall, at the very spot where he'd purchased his own, a larger light clicked on. This one was a pure, white spotlight, and under it, on the moth-eaten velvet cloth, sat his Lucidor, his specific box of damnation. It was waiting for him to come and claim it, to complete the transaction. He heard the scuff of a shoe on concrete behind him. He turned. The old man, Harold Vance, stood there in the rain, but the rain didn't touch him. It seemed to bend around his dark peacoat. His milky eyes reflected the distant streetlights with that same silvery, non-human glint. The final print is always the hardest to pull, Harold said, his voice no longer a rustle but clear and resonant. The composite, bringing all the elements together into a single, coherent image. You have been a challenging subject, Leo. So much resistance. So much guilt. It makes for interesting texture, but poor composition. What do you want? Leo's voice was a ragged thing. The final sitting, Harold said, taking a step forward. You have seen the camera's work. You have felt its power. You have been framed by its narrative. Now, you must choose your place in the picture. He gestured to the warehouse door. Inside is your camera. You can take it. Embrace its vision. Become the artist of consequence. You have the eye for it. Together, we can develop masterpieces the world has never dared to imagine. And if I refuse? Then you become a fixed element, Harold said, his head tilting.
A subject. Permanent.
You will join the collection. Your guilt over your wife, your friend, all of it frozen. A perfect, eternal portrait of failure. No more choices. No more pain. Just a beautiful, still composition. He was offering two forms of damnation, active collaborator or static artwork. Both meant surrendering to the Lucidor's process.
Leo thought of Diane.
Of her laughter, lost to a random patch of ice. No camera had predicted that. It was a meaningless tragedy. The Lucidor offered meaning, a terrible, structured meaning, to chaos. It was a liar. He thought of Ben, fighting in his hospital bed. A fight the camera had not predicted. Only the surrender. Carol's love, a force the camera's bleak portrait couldn't contain. The Lucidor's truth was a partial truth. It saw the crack, but it was blind to the glue. It saw the despair, but not the resilience. It could develop only in the dark, blind to the full spectrum of light. No, Leo said, and this time the word held not fear, but a furious finality. I develop my own pictures. He didn't run toward the street. He didn't run toward the old man. He turned and ran at the warehouse's roll-down door. It was solid steel. He slammed his shoulder into it with a desperate, futile crunch of bone. Harold Vance chuckled, a dry, papery sound, a dramatic gesture. But it changes no exposures. Leo slid down the door, clutching his screaming shoulder.
He was trapped.
The collector before him, the collection behind. Then, from within the warehouse, a new sound cut through the hum. Not a mechanical click. A voice. Faint, garbled, echoing as if from a deep well, but recognizable.
La.
It was Ben's voice. Fight it, Leo. It was followed by another. A woman's sob. Annie, the checkout girl. I'm so angry, but I didn't take the knife. Then Paul, his landlord. The bank, they called, they're working with me. A chorus of whispers, of pleas, of corrections. The subjects. The people in his portraits. Their voices were trapped here, in the negative space between what the Lucidor had predicted and what was actually happening. They were fighting their developments. And their resistance was causing a feedback loop in the camera's dark heart. Harold Vance's smug expression faltered. He turned his head sharply toward the warehouse. Silence, he hissed. The Lucidor under the spotlight in the center of the hall began to vibrate. A fine cloud of metallic dust puffed from its seams. The chorus of voices grew louder, more distinct, blending into a wordless hum of defiance. The camera was developing a flaw, a crack in its own reality. Leo saw his chance. He didn't know what would happen, but he knew the one thing the Lucidor and Harold could not tolerate: a ruined composition. With his good arm, He pulled out his cracked, dead phone. He held it up, not to take a picture, but as a mirror. He angled it, catching the reflection of the warehouse window, of the dozens of red safe lights, and of Harold Vance's furious, silver-glinted eyes. "Look," Leo spat, blood in his mouth from a split lip. "Look at your masterpiece." He thrust the reflective screen toward Harold. The old man, the first photographer, instinctively looked. He saw the reflection of his hall of horrors. He saw the glowing, failing core of his life's work. And in that reflection, he saw himself not as a powerful artist, but as a faded, desperate ghost clinging to a machine. Harold Vance screamed. It was a sound of rending metal and tearing film. In the warehouse, the central Lucidor emitted a high-pitched whine. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap contained in glass, its lens exploded. The shockwave was silent and invisible, but Leo felt it pass through him. Every safe light in the warehouse blew out, plunging it into absolute darkness. The chorus of voices cut off instantly. The rain fell on silent, empty asphalt. Harold Vance was gone. Leo was alone, shivering in the downpour, his shoulder a universe of pain. He looked at the warehouse door. It was just a door. The presence was gone. He didn't know if it was over. He didn't know if Ben would wake up, if Annie would find peace, if Paul would save his house. He didn't know if the Lucidor in his loft was now just a dead hunk of metal and glass. But he knew he had developed something tonight. Not in a tray of chemicals, but in the darkroom of his own will. He had developed a no. And for now, in the soaking, silent, real-world dark, that was the only exposure he needed. Episode 11, The Ghost Image. The silence after the implosion was absolute, more profound than any sound. Leo lay against the cold, wet warehouse door, his shoulder a white-hot brand of pain. The rain continued its indifferent tattoo on the asphalt. No silver-eyed specter, no chorus of trapped voices. Just the mundane, soaked misery of a failed break-in. He pushed himself up, wincing. The warehouse was dark. The sense of presence, the palpable dread, had vanished like a developed image submerged in fixer, arrested, static, gone. He staggered back to his car, a mile-long journey of agony and hypervigilance. Every shadow was just a shadow. Every sound was just the city. The world had reverted to its literal, boring state. He drove to the nearest 24-hour emergency clinic, where a board intern diagnosed a severe rotator cuff strain, wrapped him in a sling, and sent him home with a prescription for painkillers he had no intention of filling. Chemicals in his body were the last thing he wanted. Dawn was bleeding into the sky as he approached his loft building. He expected to feel dread. He felt only a hollow, exhausted numbness. The door to his studio was unlocked. He pushed it open. The loft was exactly as he'd left it. The kitchen table still held the bottle of scotch, the 2 glasses, the melted ice. The Lucidor was gone from the table. He moved through the space, a trespasser in his own life. He reached the darkroom, the heart of it all. The steel door was closed. The phantom print he'd seen earlier, the one with the figure turning, was gone. He took a deep breath and opened it. The red safe light was off. The room was dark. He flicked the main switch. The overhead fluorescence buzzed to life, harsh and clinical. The darkroom was clean, meticulously so. The developing trays were dry and stacked. The chemical bottles were lined up with military precision. The enlarger was dusted. It was the darkroom of a stranger, or of a man who had never had a chaotic, creative thought in his life. On the central work table, centered perfectly on a fresh sheet of blotting paper, lay the Lucidor. It looked different.
Dull.
The chrome was tarnished, not with patina, but with a flat, gray film like ashes. The leather was dry and cracked. The glass of the lenses was cloudy, opaque. It looked dead, a fossil. Next to it, placed with the same unnerving care, was a single, square contact sheet for small images from a 120 roll. He leaned in, his heart a dull thud in his bruised chest. The first frame, a shot of the hospital chapel, empty.
No, Carol.
Just quiet, peaceful pews and glowing candles. The second frame, the bank office, with Paul smiling, shaking a banker's hand. A document between them looked like a loan modification form. The third frame, the grocery break room, with Annie laughing with a coworker, the deli knife safely in its block. The fourth frame, his own alley, empty in the morning sun. No desperate figure, just wet pavement and a discarded newspaper. Resolutions. Happy endings. The fractures healed. The camera was showing him its final act, the restoration of order. It was declaring the story over. The curse lifted. It should have felt like victory. It felt like a cover-up. He picked up the contact sheet. The paper felt cold, inert. He flipped it over. On the back, in the same spidery cursive as the original price tag, was written, "A satisfactory composition requires a clear subject. You were uncooperative. The exhibition is closed."
How?
It was a dismissal, a failing grade. Harold Vance, the first photographer, had packed up his tools and left. Leo was not a worthy subject, nor a worthy collaborator. He was a spoiled exposure, a botched print tossed in the trash. A violent, unexpected rage surged through him. After all of it, the terror, the guilt, the near destruction of his soul, he was being fired by a ghost? Denied even the dignity of a monstrous end? Reduced to a technical error? He grabbed the dead, ashen Lucidor from the table. It was shockingly light like balsa wood. He carried it into the studio, to the large industrial sink. He turned on the garbage disposal, a grinding maw of steel teeth. He held the camera over it. He hesitated. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? To destroy it. But destroying a corpse wasn't a victory. It was a desecration. And it felt petty. The power was gone. All he would be destroying was a piece of curious junk, a prop in a nightmare that had chosen to exit stage left. He turned off the disposal. He placed the dead camera on a shelf, next to a stack of photography magazines. A trophy of absurdity. For the next week, Leo moved through life like a ghost himself. He visited Ben, who remained in a coma, but stable. Carol would not look at him or speak to him. He called Paul's number. It went to voicemail. He drove past the grocery store but didn't go in. The world had been reset to a default state, but his place in it had been permanently corrupted. He was the man who knew the magic was real and had watched it leave. The numbness began to harden into a deep, unsettling boredom. The terror had been acute, vivid. This was nothing. He was a blank sheet of paper. On the 8th day, he received a package. A simple, brown paper-wrapped cube, no return address. His blood ran cold. He used a box cutter to open it with trembling hands. Inside, nestled in foam, was a vintage photo album. Deep green leather, gold leaf pages. It was beautiful. He opened it. The first page held a single, large, impeccably mounted photograph. It was of a young, smiling Harold Vance, standing proudly in front of the flea market booth. The Lucidor, shiny and new, sat on the cloth. The caption in white ink read, "Acquisition, 1953. Leo turned the page. More photos. A frowning man in a fedora, holding the camera. A weeping woman in a 60s-era kitchen, the Lucidor on the table. A punk rocker in the 80s, looking defiant. Elias Vance as a young man, his eyes already holding that hungry glint. Each was a portrait of an owner, a seeing man. Each photo was a masterpiece of emotional capture, pride, despair, rebellion, cruelty. The Lucidor's greatest hits. Its former subjects. The album was a yearbook, a trophy case. He flipped to the end. The last few pages were empty, pristine black paper waiting for photos. The very last page, however, was not empty. A single, small, square photograph was glued in the center. It was a Lucidor shot. It showed Leo's darkroom from last week, the red safe light on. It was empty. But in the developer tray, under the faint red glow, a photograph was slowly appearing. It was in mid-development. The image was just beginning to swim up from the white paper, the vague shape of a man's face, his mouth open in a scream. Underneath, in the same cursive hand, was written, "The darkroom is never empty. It only awaits the next exposure." The album was not a history. It was a waiting list, and his page was prepared. He heard it then, faint but unmistakable, from the shelf across the room. A dry, mechanical sound. Work click. He looked. The ashen, dead Lucidor sat there, unchanged. But from within its clouded, opaque lens, a tiny, familiar red light began to pulse.
Once. Twice.
A safe light in a dead camera's eye. The exhibition was not closed. It was intermission. Episode 12. The Latent Image. The pulsing red light in the dead camera's lens lasted for 10 slow heartbeats, then died. The Lucidor returned to its state of ashen inertness. The photo album on Leo's lap felt like a live thing, a sleeping animal. He slammed it shut, the sound like a gunshot in the silent loft. He shoved the album into the back of his closet, behind a box of old winter coats, a childish act of burial. He threw the dead Lucidor into a drawer and locked it. Out of sight, a mantra began in his head. It's over. It's a ghost. It has no power unless you believe. It's over. He forced himself back into the world. He called Cynthia. "I need work. Anything. Product shots. School portraits. Passport photos." She was silent for a beat. "The magic is back?" Her voice was layered with sarcasm and hope. "No," Leo said, his voice flat. "Just the mechanics. I need to remember how to be a technician." She got him a gig. A corporate brochure for a local tech startup. Innovation in action. Simple, bright, clean shots of smiling employees in a sterile office. The absolute antithesis of the Lucidor's world. He took his digital camera, a tool he now regarded as a toy. He directed people. "Look here. Smile. Think synergy." He captured flat, competent, soulless images. He was paid. It felt like prostitution. At night, he dreamt of the darkroom. Not the terrifying one, but his original one. The safe one. In the dreams, he would be developing a beautiful landscape, but when he lifted the print from the fixer, it would be a portrait of Harold Vance, who would wink and say, "The fixer only stops the process you see. The latent image remains." He woke one morning with the phrase latent image echoing in his skull. In photography, it's the invisible image on the film after exposure, but before development. The potential, trapped in silver halide crystals, waiting for the chemical key. What was his latent image? The guilt over Diane? The fear over Ben? The knowledge of the fracture lines in everyone he met? He went to visit Ben, again, a weekly penance. This time, a nurse stopped him outside the ICU. "Family only, I'm afraid." Mrs. Vickers' instructions. Leo stood there, hollowed out. Carol had officially exiled him. He was a contaminant. As he turned to leave, he passed the hospital chapel. The door was ajar. He saw Carol inside. She wasn't praying. She was sitting head bowed, shoulders slumped in utter exhaustion. But she was there.
Alive.
Present. Fighting. The Lucidor's grim prediction for her had not developed. Was that his doing? Or hers? He left without her seeing him. A few days later, shooting a bland executive in a bland corner office, Leo witnessed a crack. The man, a VP named David, was smiling for the camera. His assistant walked in, whispered something in his ear, and handed him a note. David's smile didn't falter, but his eyes, for a fraction of a second, widened in pure, animal panic. It was there and gone, smoothed over by a lifetime of corporate conditioning. No one else saw it, but Leo saw it.
He recognized it.
It was the look the Lucidor lived for. A fracture. His finger on the shutter button of his digital camera twitched. He didn't press it. He lowered the camera. "Let's take 5, David. You look like you could use a coffee." The man's relief was palpable.
Yeah.
"Yeah, thanks, Leo." Leo didn't ask about the note. He didn't want to know. But for the rest of the session, he found himself subtly directing David away from the bland, smiling shots. He had him look out the window, pensive. He took a shot of his hands, clasped tightly on the desk. They were not happy corporate photos. They were honest. They were, in their own digital colorway, true. When Cynthia saw the contact sheets, she called, excited.
Leo.
"What is this?" This is character. It's dark, it's moody. The client might hate it, but it's art again." He felt a faint, terrible glow of pride. He had seen a crack, and instead of exploiting it or fearing it, he had accommodated it. He had developed it into a different kind of truth. Not a destructive one, a human one. That night, he dreamt of the darkroom again. This time, he was developing the shot of David's hands. In the dream, the fixer worked. The image stabilized. It was strong. It was good. When he woke, he went straight to the locked drawer. He didn't open it. He just stared at it. The latent image was not in the film. It was in the photographer. The Lucidor hadn't given him a power. It had activated a predisposition. He had always been able to see people. The grief had just blinded him. The camera had brutally restored his sight, then tried to force him to see only the ugly. He unlocked the drawer. He took out the dead Lucidor. He held its ashen weight. It was just a box. The power had never been in the chrome and glass. The power, and the curse, was in the seeing. Harold Vance had bound his terrible seeing to this object. Leo's seeing was his own. He placed the camera back on the shelf in plain view. A paperweight. A reminder. He felt clearer than he had in months. He was developing his own process.
The doorbell rang.
He answered it. A woman stood there, mid-40s, with intelligent, anxious eyes. She clutched a large manila envelope. "Leo Mercer? The photographer?" "Yes." "My name is Eliza Vance." The name hit him like a physical blow. Elias Vance was my uncle. Harold was my grandfather. She swallowed hard. I think you have something that belongs to my family, and I'm afraid I need it back. For everyone's sake." She held out the envelope. "I brought some of my grandfather's early work. I thought you should understand." Leo, his newfound clarity shattering, took the envelope. He pulled out a stack of photographs. They were not portraits of people. They were architectural. Houses, churches, schools. But they were all wrong. The houses sagged with invisible weight. The churches had shadows that looked like reaching claws. The school's windows were dark, vacant eyes. At the bottom of each print was a date. 1954, 1955, 1956, and a location. All the buildings were in a town called Millhaven, 200 miles north. A town Leo had never heard of. On the back of the last photo, in Harold Vance's cursive, was a note. Millhaven, where the light is wrong, where the first negative was exposed. It must be reframed. It waits for the lens. Eliza Vance looked at him, her eyes full of a dread that was generations deep. He didn't start with people, Mr. Mercer. He started with a place. He made a portrait of a town. And something in that town answered. The Lucidor isn't just a camera. It's a key. And you've been given it. We need to go back. We need to close the door he opened. The latent image wasn't in him. It was in a town. And it had been developing, in the dark, for over 60 years. Episode 13, The Town Without a Positive. Eliza Vance sat in Leo's studio, perched on the edge of the posing chair as if it were electrified. She didn't look at the shelved Lucidor. She stared at her own hands, knotted together in her lap. My grandfather was a failed pictorialist, she began, her voice low and steady, a recitation learned from painful repetition. He wanted to capture the soul of New England, the picturesque beauty. He went to Millhaven in '53 because it was pristine, untouched. He took the Lucidor, a new, expensive toy he'd bought in Boston, to document it. She gestured to the photos Leo held. The sinister houses, the claw-shadowed churches. These were his first prints from that trip. He developed them and showed them to my grandmother. She said they gave her nightmares. She said the town looked sick. He was furious. Said she didn't understand art. But privately, he was thrilled. He thought he discovered a new kind of truth. She took a shuddering breath. He went back. Again and again. Over the years, his photos changed. They became clearer. The shadows solidified. He started to see figures in the windows of the empty houses, shapes in the woods. He'd point the Lucidor at nothing, and something would develop. He stopped photographing people here. He said they were too simple. Millhaven was his great subject. And your uncle, Elias? Leo asked. My father was Harold's other son, the normal one, who wanted nothing to do with it. Elias was fascinated. He became my grandfather's apprentice. He learned the camera. He inherited the vision. But Elias was different. Grandfather was obsessed with the place, the atmosphere. Elias was obsessed with power. He realized what the camera could do to people. He took it from Millhaven and brought it into the world. He became the judge. Grandfather was furious. He said Elias was using a scalpel to chop wood, that he'd vulgarized the art. So the old man, Harold, came back for it, to give it to me. To find a proper successor, Eliza corrected, a bitter twist to her mouth. Someone with the eye, but not my uncle's crude ambitions. Someone he could guide. But you resisted. You broke the connection. Now the camera is dormant. But the door in Millhaven is still open. The negative he made of that town is still developing. And without the Lucidor's focus there, it's starting to seep. Seep? Leo felt a fresh chill. Bad things happen in Millhaven, she said simply. Not dramatic things. Slow things. A lingering depression that becomes endemic. A collapse of local industry that feels more like a surrender. A higher-than-average rate of suicides classified as accidents. It's a town that's given up. It's been living under a developing image of its own despair for 60 years. My grandfather's negative. I think the Lucidor acted as a drain. It focused the sickness, contained it. Now, with it idle, the sickness is diffusing, spreading. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. You have the camera. You have the eye he chose. We have to go there. You have to take a final picture. Not to capture the sickness, but to develop it out. To fix the image. To give the town its positive. It was insane. It was cosmic. It was the most Stephen King thing he'd ever heard. A haunted town, not by ghosts, but by a photographic negative. Why me?
Why not you?
You're his blood. Because I can't see it, she cried, her composure breaking. I'm blind to it. My father made sure of that. He raised me away from it, taught me to fear it. I can feel the wrongness, like a pressure headache, but I can't frame it. You can. The camera chose you. It showed you the fractures. Millhaven is one giant fracture. You have to point the lens and make the final exposure. Leo looked at the dead camera on the shelf.
A key.
He thought of the latent image, the potential in the silver. Millhaven was a whole town sitting in a universal developer tray. Its image, an image of rot, slowly, poisonously, becoming visible. He thought of his own latent image, his own darkness. Maybe this wasn't about saving a town. Maybe it was about developing his own negative once and for all. Okay, he said, the word leaving his lips before he could stop it. We go to Millhaven. The journey was a silent, 2-hour drive into the deepening north. The landscape grew steeper, the trees closer. The cheerful GPS voice felt like obscenity. As they crossed a rusting iron bridge over the Mill River, Eliza said, "Here. This is where he took the first one." Leo pulled over. He took the Lucidor from its case. It felt no different. Ashen, dead. He raised it, looking through the viewing lens at the town below. The lens was no longer cloudy. It was clear, perfectly focused. And through it, Millhaven did not look picturesque. It didn't even look sinister. It looked developed. The colors were leached out, replaced by a spectrum of grays, browns, and sickly yellows. The houses weren't quaint. They were crouched. The church spire wasn't majestic. It was a needle. The famous covered bridge was a dark, gaping mouth. The entire town was a perfect, finished black and white photograph from the 1950s, superimposed over the real, fading color world. He lowered the camera, blinking. With his naked eye, Millhaven was just a sleepy, slightly run-down New England village. Through the lens, it was a finished artifact of decay. "What do you see?" Eliza whispered. "The negative," Leo breathed. He didn't just take a picture of it. He made it into this.
And it's done.
It's fully developed. Work click. The sound came from the camera in his hands. The film advance lever had cocked itself. The Lucidor was awake. And it was loaded. Episode 14. The Long Exposure. The work click was a trigger cocking in the silent car. Leo stared at the Lucidor in his hands. It was no longer ashen. The chrome had a faint, feverish gleam. The leather felt supple, almost warm. The viewing lens showed the fully developed negative town of Millhaven. The camera was hungry. It was home. "It wants to finish it," Eliza said, her voice trembling. "It wants to make the print." "What does that mean?" Leo asked, not taking his eye from the lens. Through it, he saw a man walking a dog on Main Street. The man was a gray, hunched silhouette. The dog was a smudge of restless shadow. "What happens if I make the print?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe it fixes the town. Makes the negative into a positive. Maybe it makes it permanent. Makes this." She gestured to the bleak image he described, the only reality. He thought of Harold Vance's note. It must be reframed. Not destroyed. Reframed. He couldn't do this from the bridge. He had to go into the negative. "We need to find the source. The first place he shot. The focal point." Eliza nodded, pulling out a worn, leather-bound notebook from her bag. His journal. He wrote coordinates. Not of places, but of feelings. "The heart of the melancholy," he called it. She flipped pages filled with tight, angry script and small, terrible sketches.
Here.
The old Garson place, where the light refuses to gather. That's the first entry. They drove into town. The transition was surreal. Through the windshield, it was just a quiet, slightly depressed village. Through the Lucidor's viewfinder, held up like a periscope into hell, it was a monochrome nightmare. People moved like automatons. Trees were black, twisted claws against a gray-white sky. The very air seemed thick with suspended silver grains. No one looked at their car. It was as if they were ghosts, invisible to the developed world. The Garson place was a collapsed farmhouse at the end of a weed-choked lane on the town's edge. The real one was a ruin of rotten timber and caved-in roof. Through the Lucidor, it was a perfect, intact house of profound desolation. Light didn't fall on it. It leaked away from it. Leo got out, the Lucidor heavy in his hands. Eliza followed, clutching her grandfather's journal like a Bible. "This is it," she whispered. "Can you feel it?" He could. It was a suction, not of air, but of hope. A gravitational pull toward silence. He raised the camera, framed the house in the viewfinder. He adjusted the focus. As he did, the image shifted. The house didn't just sit there. It breathed. A slow, rhythmic pulsing of the shadows in its doorway. It was a heart, a diseased, photographic heart. His finger found the shutter release. This was it. The reframing. But to what end? To heal? Or to finalize? Before he could decide, a voice crackled, harsh and real, shattering the eerie quiet. "You folks lost." Leo jerked the camera down. A man in a sheriff's department cruiser had pulled up silently behind them. He was middle-aged, with a tired face and eyes that had seen too much of nothing. He looked solid, real, utterly out of place in the Lucidor's world. Through the camera, Leo quickly glanced at him. The sheriff was a blur, a smudge of unresolved gray in the sharply focused nightmare. He was not part of the negative. He was an anomaly. "Just sightseeing," Leo said, his voice rough. "Old architecture." The sheriff's eyes went from Leo's face to the antique camera in his hands. A strange, knowing flicker passed through his exhaustion. "Not much to see here but trouble. That's the Garson place. Floor's gone. Whole thing's a death trap. You should move along." "We will," Eliza said, forcing a smile. "Sorry, officer." The sheriff didn't move. He stared at the Lucidor. "That's an old piece." "A Lucidor, isn't it?" Ice shot down Leo's spine. "You know cameras?" "My dad did," the sheriff said, his voice dropping. He was a photographer. Hobbyist. He used to talk about a man with a camera like that who came through here long time ago. Took pictures that made people uneasy. He looked directly at Leo. "He said that man stole the light. You planning on stealing some light, son?" The question wasn't metaphorical. The sheriff knew. Not everything, but enough. "We're trying to give it back," Leo said, the truth escaping him. The sheriff held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you'll want the darkroom." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder, back toward town. "Old community darkroom, in the basement of the town hall. Hasn't been used in 30 years. My dad used it. Said it was the only place in town where the pictures ever developed right." He gave them one last, unreadable look. "Be gone by sundown. Things get developed in the dark here." He rolled up his window and drove away, leaving them in the swallowing silence. The darkroom. Eliza breathed. "Of course. You can't reframe a negative out in the light. You have to do it in the dark." They drove back to the sad brick town hall. The basement door was unlocked. The stairs led down into a cold, earthy darkness that smelled of damp concrete and, faintly, of acetic acid. They found the darkroom. It was a time capsule, an enlarger from the 60s. Glass bottles of dried-up chemicals, a safe light with a cracked red filter, and on the central table, Sitting alone under a drop cloth was another Lucidor, its twin. This one was pristine. Chrome shining, leather new. It looked like it had just left the factory in 1953. As they entered, the red safe light above the table flickered once, then glowed to life with a steady, bloody luminescence. On the wall, pinned under the light, was a large, magnificent, terrifying photograph. It was a panoramic view of Millhaven from the church steeple. But it wasn't the negative Leo saw through his camera. It was worse. It was a positive print of that negative. The town was rendered in stark, beautiful, horrifying clarity. Every detail of its despair was celebrated, glorious in its decay. It was signed in the bottom corner in white ink, H. Vance. Masterprint. 1954. It wasn't a picture of the town. It was the town's portrait, and it was hanging in its own heart. Leo's Lucidor gave a violent shudder in his hands. The one on the table remained still. From the developing tray beneath the master print, a voice rose. It was Harold Vance's, but liquid, as if speaking from under chemical fluid. "Welcome to the gallery, Leo. The subject is prepared. The chemicals are mixed. Now, let us see what you develop." Episode 15. The Dual Lens. The two Lucidors faced each other across the stained worktable. Leo's, now vibrantly alive, and the pristine one left by Harold Vance decades before. The masterprint on the wall seemed to vibrate in the red gloom, its beauty in affront. "It's a darkroom duel," Eliza whispered, horror-struck. "He wants you to try to beat his masterpiece, to reframe his negative with your own." Leo's mind raced. Harold wasn't trying to fix the town. He was curating it. He'd created his ultimate work, the portrait of a damned town, and now he wanted to see if a new photographer could top it. The town wasn't a subject to be saved. It was a canvas for a sick competition. The voice from the tray bubbled again. "You have the eye. You see the fractures. Show me your vision. Develop the town through your lens. Let us compare compositions." Leo looked at the masterprint. It was flawless in its horror. He could never outdo it. He couldn't even match it. His vision wasn't that grand, that cruel. He saw individual cracks, Ben's despair, Annie's rage, not an entire civilization's collapse. But maybe that was the point. He thought of the sheriff, a blur in the negative.
An anomaly.
Not part of the developed despair. A living, unresolved element. He raised his Lucidor, but he didn't point it at the masterprint, or at the wall, or at the town outside. He turned it on the pristine Lucidor sitting on the table. Through the viewfinder, the second camera wasn't a camera. It was a dark, intricate knot of shadows, a vortex of silver filaments. It was the source. The negative wasn't the town. The negative was this camera. Harold had used it to imprint his vision onto Millhaven. The town was just the developed print. "What are you doing?" Eliza gasped. "Changing the subject," Leo said, his voice steady with a sudden, absolute certainty. He focused. The shadow knot in the viewfinder tightened, became a perfect, malignant singularity. He pressed the shutter. Clunk. The sound was catastrophic in the small room. The pristine Lucidor on the table shuddered. A hairline crack appeared in its viewing lens. From the masterprint on the wall, a low moan emanated, as if the paper itself was in pain. "Wrong." Harold's voice screeched, no longer cultured, but raw. "The town is the subject." "The town?" "No," Leo said, advancing. "The camera is. You made this. This is your true portrait. Not the town. Your loneliness. Your need to make everything as ugly as you believed the world to be. That's the negative. And I'm going to fix it." He advanced the film, the work click defiant. He took another step, framing the cracked Lucidor again. He could see the shadow knot writhing now, lashing out like tendrils. You develop nothing. Harold's voice was everywhere, in the chemicals, in the stones, in the red light. You are a snapshot. A blur. On the table, the pristine Lucidor shutter fired by itself. Clunk.
No flash.
But in Leo's mind, an image developed with instant, terrible clarity. It was Diane. Not as he remembered her, but as the Lucidor saw her. A figure of blinding, painful light. An overexposed angel. And around her, a consuming, perfect darkness, the void of her absence. The image was a searing binary, light so intense it burned, and a black so absolute it swallowed. It was the photograph of his grief, rendered with Harold Vance's cruel genius. It was beautiful. It was annihilating. Leo cried out, staggering, his own camera nearly falling from his hands. The grief, which had been a dull ache, was now a fresh, open wound, developed to its maximum contrast. "Don't look at it," Eliza shouted, but she couldn't see what he saw. "It's an illusion. It's what he wants you to see." The pristine Lucidor fired again. Clunk. Another image. Ben, in his hospital bed, but the bed was a stone slab, and Ben was an ancient, desiccated corpse, a mummy with a saxophone clutched in its bony hands. The portrait of irretrievable loss. Leo fell to one knee, the weight of the visions crushing him. Harold wasn't fighting with ghosts or monsters. He was fighting with the photographer's greatest vulnerability, his own portfolio of pain. He was developing Leo's own negatives against him. Through tears of agony, Leo saw his own Lucidor on the floor where he'd dropped it. The viewing lens pointed up at him. In its dark glass, he saw his own reflection. Not the shattered, grieving man he felt like. He saw a man on his knee, yes, but a man with a camera in his hand. A man in a darkroom. A man developing. He wasn't a subject. He was the photographer. With a roar that came from the same place as the shutters clunk, he grabbed his Lucidor.
He didn't stand.
He stayed on one knee, braced his elbow on his thigh, and aimed. He didn't look through the viewfinder this time. He looked past the camera at the pristine Lucidor on the table. He didn't see a shadow knot. He saw a machine.
A tool.
A thing that took what was inside a man and made it external. He saw Harold Vance's fear of being ordinary. He pressed the shutter. Clunk. The sound was different. Fuller. Final. The pristine Lucidor didn't crack. It undeveloped. The chrome tarnished in a wave, turning black then flaking to dust. The leather peeled and curled like burning paper. The lenses clouded over, then dissolved, leaving empty, hollow sockets. The master print on the wall above it caught fire. Not with flames, but with a reverse light. It bleached from the center outward, the glorious details of decay vanishing into pure, blinding white. The red safe light exploded in a shower of glass and darkness. In the sudden, total black, Harold Vance's voice was a fading whisper, full of not rage, but a terrible, wondering confusion. What did you expose?" Then silence. A heavy, physical silence. The kind after a great noise stops. A flashlight beam cut the dark. Eliza had her phone out. She shone it around. The second Lucidor was a pile of gray dust and brittle flakes on the table. The master print was a blank, white sheet of paper. The chemical smells were gone, replaced by dust and age. Leo's Lucidor lay in his hand. It was cool, inert, just a heavy old camera. He stood up, his body aching. He felt emptied out, scoured. "Is it over?" Eliza asked, her voice small in the vast dark. Before he could answer, a faint, gray pre-dawn light began to filter down the basement steps from the street-level door. Not the red of a safe light. The real, cool, colorless light of morning. Together, they climbed the stairs and pushed open the door. Millhaven lay before them in the early light. It wasn't transformed. The houses were still old. The paint was still peeling. But the crouch was gone. The sense of being watched by the very trees had vanished. The air felt light, just cold morning air, not thickened with despair. It looked like what it was, a tired, poor, old town. Not a masterpiece of damnation.
Just a place.
A positive at last. In the distance, a dog barked. A normal, happy sound. A car engine turned over. Leo looked down at the Lucidor in his hand. He knew what he had to do. He walked to the Mill River, running high and fast with spring melt. He drew back his arm. "Wait," Eliza said softly. She took the camera from him, not to stop him. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, her grandfather's legacy. Then she handed it back. "It's yours to finish." Leo nodded. He hurled the Lucidor into the center of the rushing, ice-cold current. It vanished without a splash, swallowed by the living water. He stood there, watching the river flow. He felt the latent images in his own heart, the grief, the guilt, the fear. They were still there, but they were his to develop now. In his own time, in his own darkroom, he turned to Eliza. "Let's go home." They drove away from Millhaven as the sun broke over the hills, casting long, ordinary, beautiful shadows. Episode 16, The Afterimage. The world after Millhaven was too bright, too loud, too real. It felt like an overexposed photograph, lacking the deep, dramatic shadows Leo had grown accustomed to. The silence in his loft wasn't the listening silence of the Lucidor's presence. It was just empty. He missed the dread the way an amputee misses a phantom limb, a sick, undeniable truth. He visited Ben. The coma had broken. Ben was awake, weak, confused, but alive. His first slurred words were, "Did we get the shot?" Leo cried, for the first time since Diane's funeral, great heaving sobs of relief that felt like they were tearing his soul in two. It was a good pain, a developing pain. Carol was wary but allowed him in the room. She didn't speak to him, but she didn't throw him out. It was a start, a latent image of forgiveness. He tried to go back to work. The digital camera felt absurd in his hands, a child's toy. He took a corporate portrait. The executive smiled. Leo saw the strain around the eyes, the faint sheen of sweat on the temple, the tiny fractures. But now, instead of seeing a damning portrait of hidden anxiety, he saw a man working too hard to provide for his family. He directed him to think of his daughter's graduation. The smile that emerged was tired, but real. It was a good photograph, not a masterpiece. Human. Cynthia was pleased. "You've mellowed, Leo. It's commercial." He wasn't mellow. He was processing. Then the dream started. Not of the Lucidor, or Harold Vance, or Millhaven. He dreamt of photographs developing in clear water. A river. The Mill River. In the dream, he'd look into the flowing water and see faces forming in the currents, not screaming, not damned, just looking back at him with quiet expectation before dissolving downstream. He woke each morning with a phrase, "fix or wash," in his head. The final rinse that removes all traces of the development chemicals, leaving a stable image. Had he truly rinsed the Lucidor's chemistry from his life? 3 weeks after returning, he received a package. A small, flat, stiff envelope. No return address. Postmarked from Millhaven. His hands didn't shake as he opened it. He felt a strange, resigned calm. Inside was a single 5 by 7-inch photograph. It was a contact print, ragged on the edges. It showed the Mill River from the very spot where he'd thrown the camera in. The water was a blur of motion. But in the center of the blur, held in perfect, frozen focus, was the Lucidor. It wasn't being swept away. It was sitting on the riverbed, facing up, its lens a dark, unbroken circle pointed at the sky. The water flowing over it looked like liquid glass. On the back, in now familiar cursive, was a new message. The fixer only halts the process. It does not erase the image. The negative endures.
还好，
It was signed, but the signature was different. Fainter. The paper itself felt damp, cold, and smelled faintly of river moss and silver nitrate. Harold Vance was gone, but the photograph was not. The negative of the town, of the curse, of the whole insane history, endured. Somewhere. And the camera, the key, was still present. Not active, but waiting. A latent image at the bottom of a river. Leo didn't tell Eliza. He framed the river photo and hung it in his studio, next to a portrait of Diane. A reminder. A warning. A trophy. He began to take walks along the river in his own city, the Kennebec. He'd stare into the brown, sluggish water, wondering what latent images were developing on its muddy bed. Episode 17. The New Subject. Eliza Vance called. Her voice was different, lighter, but with a new, focused energy. I've been going through the rest of Grandfather's estate. The normal stuff. And I found a ledger. Not for curios. For commissions. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the river wind. Commissions? People hired him. Not to take family portraits. They hired him to photograph things. A house that wouldn't sell because of bad feelings. A factory where accidents kept happening. A patch of woods where children kept getting lost. She paused. He didn't just randomly find Millhaven, Leo. Someone from the town council paid him to come in 1953. They wanted him to document the unique atmosphere. I think they felt the sickness and wanted it defined, contained. He contained it in a camera, Leo said, understanding dawning. He didn't create it. He focused it. He was an exorcist with a lens. Or a prison warden, Eliza replied. But that's not all. The ledger has entries after Millhaven, up until the late 80s. He was hired by other people in other towns for similar atmospheric documentation projects. He had it a practice. The idea was horrifying and made perfect sense. Harold Vance, the photographer psychic, the developer of spiritual negatives. He traveled to haunted places and bottled their hauntings in photographic form, using the Lucidor as both scalpel and specimen jar. Millhaven was just his largest, most successful capture. Where's this ledger? Leo asked. With me. And Leo, there are client names, addresses. One of the last entries is from 1987, a place called Stonehaven Asylum in Vermont. It was scheduled for demolition. The developers hired him to clear the atmosphere. He spent a week there. The entry just says, Subject, Stonehaven. Highly reactive. Multiple strata of exposure. Required extensive fixation. Fee, $5,000. Then it's blank. What happened to the asylum? It was demolished in 1988. A strip mall was built on the site. It failed within 2 years. It's a vacant lot now. They say nothing will grow there. Leo looked at the framed photo of the river, the Lucidor waiting on its bed. Harold Vance's life's work was scattered across New England, a series of contained psychic landmines. And the key to all of them was currently underwater. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Eliza asked, her voice trembling with a scholar's horrifying excitement. He didn't destroy the negatives, Leo said softly. He developed them, fixed them, and filed them away. In the camera, the Lucidor isn't just a camera. It's an archive, a prison album. And you threw the warden's keys into the river, Eliza finished. but the prisoners are still in their cells. Episode 18. The Archive. They met at a diner halfway between their cities. Eliza spread photocopies from the ledger on the Formica table. The entries were brief, clinical, and chilling. Subject: Gable Farm. Recurring phantom odors: rotting roses. Single exposure sufficient. Fee: $200. 1961. Subject: Portsmouth Dock Number 7. Drowning echoes. Required triple exposure. Fee: $750. 1972. Subject: The Carlisle House. Per client: The Weeping. Complex. Sentient resonance. Required custom development. Fee: $2,000. 1980. He monetized despair, Leo muttered, tracing the entry for Stonehaven Asylum. He didn't cure these places. He diagnosed them and bottled the disease. And we have the list of where the bottles are buried, Eliza said. But without the camera, we can't see them. We can't verify. Maybe that's for the best, Leo said, but it felt like a lie. He was a photographer. Verification was his religion. To know a thing existed was to frame it, to expose it, to make it real. Ignorance was a blurry, unacceptable picture. What if the camera's influence is degrading? Eliza posited, her eyes alight with a dangerous theory. Like a chemical breaking down over time. What if those contained negatives are starting to leak? Not just Millhaven, but all of them? The Gable Farm smell returning? New drownings at the old dock. The world suddenly seemed thinner to Leo, like a photographic backdrop with countless tears, each one a Harold Vance subject slowly bleeding through. He thought of the news, the random clusters of suicides, the bad luck neighborhoods, the places with a weird vibe. Were they all developed negatives slowly fogging the real world? His phone buzzed. A Google alert he'd set up long ago for Elias Vance. He opened it. It was a brief society piece from a Boston paper. A charity auction. And there, in a crowd shot, was Elias Vance, out on appeal, wearing an expensive suit, smiling his marble tomb smile. The caption identified him as a philanthropist and art collector. But Leo's eyes were locked on what was in the background of the photo, on a display table behind Vance. Among other donated curios was a camera, a boxy, twin-lens reflex. It was blurry, pixelated. But Leo knew the shape, the proportions, the Lucidor. It wasn't in the river. Or it was, but this was another one. Harold Vance hadn't just had the one. The ledger was a record of commissions, not camera serial numbers. How many Lucidors had there been? A whole line of them? A family business, indeed. He showed the picture to Eliza. Her face went pale. The auction. It's tonight. In Boston. Elias Vance was selling a Lucidor to the highest bidder. Episode 19. The Auction. The auction house was a temple of polished wood and hushed, moneyed voices. Leo and Eliza slipped in, looking utterly out of place among the tailored suits and diamond brooches. They took seats at the back. Lot after lot passed. Mediocre paintings, overpriced jewelry, a set of first-edition books. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. His eyes scanned the crowd, finding the back of Elias Vance's silver-haired head in the front row. He sat perfectly still, a predator pretending to be a statue. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced. A collection of vintage photographic equipment, including a very rare Lucidor twin-lens reflex camera circa 1950s from the personal collection of Elias Vance. A porter brought out a tray. There it was. Not Leo's, not the one from Millhaven's darkroom. A third Lucidor. This one looked opulent. Its chrome was mirror bright, its leather dyed a deep, bloody burgundy. It looked less like a tool and more like a religious artifact for a very dark church. The bidding started low, from collectors of obscure tech. Then Elias Vance, without turning, raised his own paddle. A murmur went through the crowd. The bid jumped. From the other side of the room, a tall, gaunt man in a black suit raised his paddle. He had the pallor of someone who lived under fluorescent lights, and his eyes were hidden behind thin, wire-rimmed glasses. The bidding became a duel between Vance and the gaunt man. It soared past the value of any camera, becoming a battle of wills. Vance's jaw was tight. The gaunt man's expression was unreadable. Leo knew with cold certainty the gaunt man wasn't a collector. He was a client, or a descendant of one. Someone who knew what the Lucidor could really do. Someone who wanted his own negative developed, or someone else's contained. "It's going to be a weapon," Eliza whispered, horrified. Leo stood up. The action felt automatic, driven by a reflex deeper than fear. All eyes turned to him. $100,000, Leo said, his voice ringing in the shocked silence. He had about $1,200 in his bank account. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, the bid is at $45,000. You wish to bid $100,000? Elias Vance slowly turned his head. His eyes met Leo's. There was no surprise, only a cold, glittering recognition and a flicker of that old, hungry cruelty. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "I wondered if you'd come." The gaunt man stared at Leo, his head cocked like a bird assessing a worm. He did not raise his paddle. Going once, twice. The auctioneer looked desperately at Vance, who gave a tiny, dismissive wave of his hand.
Sold.
To the gentleman in the back for $100,000. A wave of adrenaline-sick nausea washed over Leo. He had just bought a curse he couldn't pay for. As the porters moved to bring the camera to him, the gaunt man stood and walked swiftly out, throwing one last, long look at the Lucida, a look not of loss, but of recalculating. Elias Vance did not approach Leo. He simply stood, smoothed his suit, and walked out a different exit, a ghost of a smile on his lips. His work was done. The camera was back in play. In the antechamber, a lawyer approached Leo with a contract. "Mr. Vance has extended you a line of credit for the purchase, contingent on one condition." "What condition?" Leo asked, his mouth dry. "That you accept delivery of the item and provide a written testimonial of its photographic qualities within 1 month. The lawyer smiled a thin, professional smile. "He is curious about your artistic development." It was a trap, of course. Elias couldn't use the camera himself anymore. His connection was too crude, too greedy. He needed a new seeing man. And he had just financially bound Leo to become one. Leo took the case containing the burgundy Lucidor. It was heavier than his had been. It hummed with a silent, patient potential. The gaunt man was waiting outside by a black town car. He handed Leo a plain white business card. On it was only a GPS coordinate and a date, 2 weeks hence. Below that, handwritten, "The weeping requires a new portrait. Your predecessor's work is fading. Fee, open." He got in the car and drove away. Leo stood on the sidewalk, holding a camera he couldn't pay for and a commission to rephotograph a horror from his predecessor's ledger. The Carlisle house. The weeping. The archive was open, and he had just been appointed its new, reluctant archivist. Episode 20. The Successor. The burgundy Lucidor sat on Leo's work table, a sleek, malevolent jewel. He didn't open the case. He knew it was loaded. He knew it would work. The debt and the commission hung over him like a developer's timer, ticking down. He researched the Carlisle house. It had been demolished in 1992. A small park was there now. A nice park. No reports of weeping. Harold Vance's custom development had held for decades. But according to the Gaunt Man, a descendant of the original client, it was failing. Eliza helped, her fear now transformed into a fierce, protective determination. We don't have to do this. We can throw this one in the ocean. We can walk away. And be sued for $100,000 I don't have? Leo said. And leave that thing out there for someone like the Gaunt Man to eventually claim? Elias set this up perfectly.
I'm trapped.
Then we control the narrative, she said, of Vance herself, thinking like her grandfather. We use the camera but on our terms. Not to contain but to dissolve. You didn't reframe Millhaven by making a better picture. You changed the subject. You pointed the lens at the source. Maybe that's the key. Don't photograph the weeping. Photograph whatever Harold did to contain it. Photograph the container. It was brilliant. The Lucidor saw truth. What was the truth of a haunting contained by a photograph? That it was a photograph, an image, an idea given shape by a specific gaze. The night before he was to meet the Gaunt Man at the coordinates, Leo finally opened the case. The burgundy Lucidor gleamed. He didn't touch it. He set up his digital camera on a tripod, pointed it at the Lucidor, and set a timer. He took a picture of the camera. He printed the digital photo, a simple, color, modern image of an old camera. Then, using a vintage magnifying glass and a pinpoint light, he examined the Lucidor's lens. Deep within the complex glass, almost microscopic, was an etching. A tiny, perfect negative of a weeping willow tree. The mark of the Carlisle House Commission. Harold hadn't just taken a picture. He'd branded his tool with the subject. The camera was part of the prison. The Gaunt Man's coordinates led to the park, now empty at midnight. The man was there, standing under a street lamp. "Do you have the equipment?" he asked, no pleasantries. "Yes," Leo said, holding the case. "The phenomenon has returned. In the southwest corner of the park, near the old foundation stones. A cold spot. The sound of a woman sobbing. It's bad for property values. Our family wishes it remedied. Permanently." "I'll need to be alone," Leo said. The Gaunt Man nodded and retreated to his town car, a distant, watching silhouette. Leo walked to the southwest corner. He felt nothing. No cold.
No weeping.
Just grass, trees, the hum of distant traffic. Harold's work was still strong, but cracking. The negative was fading back in. He didn't open the case. He took out the digital print he'd made, the picture of the Lucidor. He knelt on the grass, facing the spot where the foundation would have been. He held up the print, facing it outward, like a priest holding an icon. He thought not of weeping, but of capturing. Of Harold Vance, here in 1980, framing this sorrow, bending it to his will, etching its symbol into his glass. He thought of the arrogance, the reduction of a human tragedy to a sentient resonance and a fee. He said, to the empty air, "He framed you. He made you small. You don't have to be his picture anymore." A breeze kicked up, cold and localized. A whisper of sound, like a sigh, rustled the leaves. It wasn't sorrow. It was recognition. Leo took a lighter from his pocket. He held the flame to the corner of the digital print. The modern photographic paper curled, blackened, caught fire. He held it as it burned, the image of the burgundy Lucidor consumed by flame, until he had to drop the shrinking, black remnant onto the soil. The cold spot vanished. The air stilled. The sense of a listening presence dissolved. He hadn't used the Lucidor. He had performed an exorcism on the idea of the Lucidor, on its claim to own this pain. He walked back to the Gaunt Man, carrying the unopened case. "Is it done?" the man asked, peering at him. "It's free," Leo replied. "And it won't come back. The contract is void. Tell your family the debt to the past is paid." He got in his own car and drove away before the man could respond. The next morning, he went to the river, the Kennebec, not the mill. He held the burgundy Lucidor. He opened the back. The film inside was old, exposed, blank. He ripped it out, letting it unwind into the muddy water. Then he opened the camera's lens plate with a small screwdriver. He pried out the delicate, etched lens containing the willow tree negative. He held it up to the sun, a tiny, perfect image of trapped sorrow. He crushed it between two rocks and scattered the dust. The now blind, inert camera body he placed gently back in its case. He didn't throw it in the river. He drove to a landfill on the edge of the city and buried it deep in a mound of reeking, everyday garbage. He wasn't Harold Vance. He wouldn't build an archive. He would dismantle it, one etched lens, one burned print at a time. He had the ledger. He knew the subjects: the Gable Farm, the Portsmouth Dock, Stonehaven Asylum. The work would take years. It would be dangerous. It would change him. He was no longer the subject or the victim. He wasn't even the photographer. He was the developer. And he was finally choosing his own chemicals. Episode 21, the final print, the end. 5 years later. The darkroom was different. Not the old, chemical one. A digital suite, all soft light and glowing screens. But the principle was the same, taking captured light and finding the truth within it. On the wall were framed photographs. A portrait of Ben, back to teaching, laughing with a group of band students, his arm in a sling, but his eyes bright. A shot of Carol, smiling tentatively at a community garden. A landscape of the Mill River, sunny and ordinary, with no dark shapes on its bed. And a beautiful, simple photo of Diane's reading chair, now with a patch of sunlight across it, holding a fresh book. Leo Mercer's studio was successful. He was known for portraits of profound humanity, not because he exposed hidden flaws, but because he collaborated with his subjects to find the light that persisted alongside the cracks. He called it available light photography as a private joke. The Vance ledger was now a digital file, encrypted. Next to each entry, Gable Farm, Portsmouth Dock, Stonehaven, was a status update. Gable Farm, location converted to a flower nursery.
No richieding olfattori fenomeni.
Lens defocused via resonance frequency broadcast 2024. Portsmouth Dock Number 7, site of New Maritime Museum. Acoustic survey clear. Negative dissolved via targeted infrasound 2025. Stonehaven Asylum, lots soil remediation complete. Community vegetable garden planted. First harvest successful. Contained mass neutralized via controlled geomagnetic pulse, 2026. The methods were unconventional, a blend of Eliza's historical research, hired scientific consultants, and Leo's intuitive understanding of how the negatives worked. They didn't use a Lucidor. They used physics, psychology, and sheer stubborn will to convince places to forget the picture Harold Vance had made of them. It was slow, expensive, careful work. They were archivists of a different kind, not preserving, but restoring, deleting the corrupted files from the world's hard drive. Elias Vance died in prison, of a stroke. The papers called him a disgraced former jurist. Leo knew him as a failed artist, all ambition and no vision. Eliza Vance became a respected historical researcher, specializing in the folklore of place and memory. She and Leo were partners, siblings in a strange war. They never spoke of Harold as grandfather or monster, but as the primary source. One autumn afternoon, Eliza came to the studio. She carried no ledger, no documents. She looked older, peaceful. "It's the last one," she said simply. The Carlisle house was the final active site from the ledger. The others are quiet. The treatments held. Leo leaned back in his chair. a profound fatigue and a deeper relief washing over him. So it's over. His work is over, Eliza corrected gently. Yours isn't. She was right. He had a portrait session that afternoon. A young couple, expecting their first child. They wanted something real, not perfect.
He knew how to do that now.
After she left, Leo went to a locked cabinet. Inside was not a camera, but a simple archival box. He opened it. It contained the river bottom photo of the first Lucidor, still clear under its glass. A handful of business cards from the gaunt man and others like him, now useless. A shard of the crushed burgundy lens. And a single, blank sheet of 1950s photographic paper found in Harold's old darkroom supplies. He took out the blank sheet. It was a negative, waiting for an exposure that would never come. He went to the digital printer, the modern equivalent of the developer tray. He pulled up a file, a composite image he'd been working on for years. It was a collage, not of horrors, but of resolutions.
Ben Lefine.
Flowers growing at Stonehaven. The quiet park where the Carlisle house once stood. The smiling faces of people whose fractures he'd seen and, in some small way, had helped hold together. He printed it. The modern inks bloomed on premium paper, vivid and lasting. He took this new, positive print and placed it carefully on top of the blank, vintage paper in the archival box. He closed the lid.
He didn't bury it.
He didn't burn it. He placed the box back in the cabinet and locked it. The past was a negative. It existed. It had shaped the exposure of his life. But he was no longer developing in its chemicals. He was making his own prints, in his own light.
The doorbell chimed.
The young couple had arrived, full of hope and nerves and love. Leo Mercer, photographer, smiled. He walked to the door, leaving the darkroom behind, and stepped into the bright, messy, beautifully unresolved light of the present. The end.